I will start introducing Sarah. I'm a big fan of Sarah ever since I became a UX designer. She was obviously already in the industry, very senior, a very articulate voice. I actually met her when I invited her as a guest on an Instagram post series that I was organizing. It was called the InstaView. And I invited Jared Spool, I invited Jacob Nielsen, and I was super happy when Sarah accepted the invitation as well. And so I've been a fan of her for a long time now. She's the founder and CEO of Career Strategy Lab, which is a UX career accelerator that helps UX professionals design fulfilling careers, get hired without applying to hundreds of roles, which is also the topic of a recent podcast we recorded together that's going to be out soon. And it's called How to Stop Applying to 100 Jobs. And she's been featured in Forbes, UX Magazine, InVision, Adobe, just name it, and a lot of podcasts also, and most recently on Honest UX Talks. And I think that I want to give her the stage to introduce herself and tell us a little bit more about herself and her work in the design industry. So hi, Sarah. Thank you for accepting this invitation and for bearing with my very long introduction. Please, if you could. Yeah.
That was great. I'm excited to be here. I always love connecting with people live, and I see that we have people from all over the world, which is also super exciting. Yeah, so I am the founder of Career Strategy Lab, which is designed to help you get hired faster without applying to hundreds of jobs. And we do that through a combination of group and one-on-one career coaching, tons of on-demand, like Netflix style, detailed training about your resume, your portfolio, creating what we call a career roadmap for your career, your job search, interviews, literally everything. And for the 2-minute backstory of how this whole thing came to be, I've been working in UX for quite a long time. I worked at some startups in New York City, and then I started my own UX research and experience design consultancy. For when I say I am a UX designer, I specifically focus on research and experience design, meaning the user flows, the wireframes, the research, etc. I am not what I would call like a visual or interface designer making pixel perfect stuff. I do my own design, but I don't let anyone else pay me to do theirs. The researcher in me about 4 years ago noticed this problem that many UX people, regardless of your stage, struggle with resume, portfolio, getting hired, etc. And I knew this because my inbox was flooded with this question. So long story short, I made a little workshop about the topic, thought I'd never have to talk about it again. And then people started to get hired. And then the researcher, and I guess in hindsight, entrepreneur in me thought, I think I'm onto something. And that was in 2017. And now it's 2022, and here we are.
Thank you so much for sharing the background. And it definitely, I think you're, in my perspective, you're the most prominent figure in doing work around career orientation and helping people land dream jobs and figure out what they're doing wrong in their job hunt and how to optimize their portfolio. Probably many of our joiners tonight have heard about the UX portfolio formula, which is program that I don't know if it's still up, but it was up for a long time.
Yeah, that was kind of how this whole thing started back in 2017, and it's still available. It's very self-study. There's no like critiques of your resume and things like that. No real contact with our team. It's just purely do it on your own at your own pace. And Career Strategy Lab is the more in-depth, hands-on, high-touch experience that we created as an evolution of UX portfolio formula, because we treat this whole thing like a product, and it just was a natural extension of what we're doing.
I love this idea of treating your business as a product, and I think that it's also something that you advocate for. Treating your career as a product is something that I think you coined as a concept. Or at least you promote it a lot, and you stand strongly by it. So, but let's dive into the topic for tonight. I want to make the most out of the time we have available. And I know that the people who joined tonight, and thank you so much for such a great turnout. We are almost close to 100 participants in this meeting. It's awesome. It's super exciting. So based on the questions that came in the question stickers on Instagram and that we managed to gather from you, we realized that there are basically two important themes for today's conversation. The first one, or the one we chose to dive in first, is the portfolio part. And then in the second half of the event, we will be talking about the job hunt in general. So let's start with portfolios. UX portfolios, they're very, very much talked about. There's a lot of confusion and controversy around them. Let's try to answer some of the essential questions surrounding UX portfolios. So Sarah, you have probably the most experience with UX portfolios. What are the most common mistakes you see in design portfolios again and again?
Yeah, that's a huge question. And I was thinking about this beforehand, and I want to kind of avoid just surface level answers here, because I think if we can kind of help everyone see the big picture, I think that will cause you to think differently about your portfolio and then realize some of the low-hanging fruit mistakes you're making. So for today, I think the biggest mistake that people make is you don't treat your portfolio like a product. And attached to that is many UX people don't consider the user of your portfolio. And we have an article about that we'll drop in the chat and put in the notes or whatever you get. But let's think about that user of your portfolio, right? Because I think many of you make it to satisfy yourself and make yourself feel good, honestly. And I know that the goal is that you're going to use it to send out to applications and hiring managers, etc. But it doesn't reflect you actually thinking about the user. So let's think about those users of your portfolio. There are multiple users, first of all. So if you're applying to a role, it's not just like the people in the interview. You have to look at that whole hiring process and think to yourself, there's probably someone in an HR department that maybe has not worked in user experience, but possibly is going to be determining or doing that first vetting, right? And of course, this depends on size of company, type of company, etc. But there's probably this user that has not worked in UX and needs to get a high-level understanding or evidence that you know what you're doing. Then there's people who might be your manager or your peers, and they're going to want more information. So if you think of it like an iceberg, you have to think of like that top part as being enough to make that person in HR or doing that first pass kind of catch their eye. And then the bottom of the iceberg, you make sure that you go into the details of your process, your projects, etc., so that when you get to the interviews, the people who are already working in user experience don't feel like you're talking like at a kindergarten level to them when they're at grade 12 or something like that. Does that make sense, that analogy?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I really love the empathy towards the recruiter
right.
as well.
So
everybody leaves them out of the story somehow.
Well, yeah. And then if you take that further, because I know a lot of people think, okay, that was nice, but tangibly, like, tell me 3 things I can do. The number one thing that I think we could all agree on is that these people are super busy, and they are oftentimes inundated with candidates. So side note, I'm doing a bunch of research regarding a new secret product we're launching related to hiring. And I've been talking to a lot of hiring managers. And one of the questions is, what are the biggest struggles that you face in hiring? And I meant to bring up some of the answers on my screen, but anecdotally, the major theme is we are tired of receiving tons of applications from people who are not qualified. Or on the flip side, we're not getting applications because we're not a FANG company and no one's heard of us, but we're desperate to hire people. So let's just focus on that problem they have of volume of candidates, unqualified people not applying, or maybe you are qualified, except your materials don't reflect that. So tangible things you can do. I mean, the most basic thing I think is look at your portfolio or have someone else look at it and think to yourself, is this skimmable? Is this scannable? If someone had, 20 seconds per slide, what is the thing on that slide that's going to catch their eye? So if we think about basic design principles, if all of the text on the page is the same font size, and there's no, what we refer to in Career Strategy Lab as a headline at the top of the slide, they're going to see a bunch of paragraphs and their brain's just going to be like, too much text, can't process, But I want to be really clear. When I say headline, I don't mean wireframes in 24-point font. Because if it says wireframes in 24-point font, and then there's a wireframe below that, it's like, obviously that's a wireframe. That headline should be a sentence. I repeat this a million times a week, but that's probably the number one thing that people could do to help improve the readability, skimmability, scannability, etc. And that goes to basic design principles like alignment, hierarchy, grouping things, etc. Anything else you can think of that I didn't mention?
Well,
and then I have two things I just remembered.
Yeah, no, I think you covered. I mean, there are some if I go in the weeds with things that I hate in portfolios, I also have my own, but best. I mean, we're looking at the general things. For me, a deal breaker is always when I see this overly engineered angles of mock-ups where you don't see what in the design, you just see this very beautiful slanted angle but it's unreadable. It's irrelevant if you want, in a way. It's just marketing. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, and think of your user, and I say this all the time, but your user doesn't want to have to tilt their head, and this is not a marketing website for I don't know, some marketing company, but you want your work to stand out. So don't get all cute. And that leads me to one of the points I wanted to make. Don't overly design your portfolio. And I think that's a great example of it. Don't get cute with fonts. What else? The other thing I was going to mention is I think a lot of people jump right into Keynote, PowerPoint, whatever you're making in. Side note, I advocate for a PDF, which we'll get to later, but a lot of you jump to the design. And that's pretty ironic because if we think about products you work on, you've probably all worked on a product where the team jumped right into high fidelity design. And I think it's safe to say 9 times out of 10, that probably doesn't end well. So in Career Strategy Lab, we almost force you, we don't really force you, but we strongly, strongly recommend you start with the content of your portfolio. So you literally write it out in Google Docs before you ever start playing around with layout and where the images go and, what fonts you were using and all that stuff.
So now that we've been a little into what might go wrong with UX portfolios and what's definitely a turn off for recruiters and hiring managers and what not to do, I would be super curious to explore what are some best practices when it comes to designing your portfolio. What are the most important parts within a design portfolio? So what should a designer focus on? What should they have in their portfolio?
Yeah. So I was thinking about this. I think it makes sense to zoom into an individual project in a portfolio and not think about, the little intro about you and all this stuff, because I think that's where a lot of people fall short. And I think, and let us know in the chat, but I think a lot of people probably have confusion around what goes into a project in my portfolio. What does it mean to tell a story or show my process like I see on Twitter and LinkedIn and Medium, 100 times a day, right? You hear this advice, everyone tells you what to do. No one really explains how to do that in detail. So when you're thinking about an individual project in your portfolio, again, it goes back to the user. It's possible that the people looking at this project, the person in HR, the potential hiring manager, colleague, etc., first of all, they may have never heard of this company, especially if it's not kind of a household brand name, if it's not an American Express or IBM or KLM Airlines or something like that. So if you have projects that are from companies that you think to yourself, yeah, probably no one knows what this is, that's where it's really important to have one slide, maybe two, but probably one, that's like setting up the context of what the heck was this company? Like, what did they do? And even for those companies that maybe people have heard of, it could be beneficial to do this, because if you work, say, I don't know, at KLM Airlines, you might work on more behind the scenes stuff. You might work on the consumer app, So setting that context of the company and the project is super, super important. And I can confidently say this because very, very often I receive feedback from people in Career Strategy Lab who get hired and say things like, and I'm paraphrasing, but they loved my portfolio and said it was one of the best they ever saw, or they said my storytelling was so strong. Someone even yesterday said something like they wanted to share my portfolio with the rest of the team so everyone could improve their presentation skills in general. So context, like write that on a sticky note, context, context, context. Because if you lose someone on that initial slide, nothing else is going to make sense, right? It's like if you're sitting in a movie and after 5 minutes, you don't know what's going on, it's like you're probably going to bounce. So that's thing number one. Then after you do that setup, another thing is, I think there is a myth out there, I'd love to know who's spreading it, that every single project in your portfolio must tick the box of the double diamond process or the human-centered process or whatever graphic of a process that some person made to try and get famous in the UX community. Like, your portfolio doesn't need to show every single one of those steps, especially if you don't do all of those things. So as an example, if you're a UX writer, you should not be stressing out that you need to then go learn Figma and make a pixel perfect design for something you worked on just to check the box of this proverbial perfect UX process, because that's unrealistic, right? Or like a UX researcher, having something about visual design. Not all researchers do design, right? So don't do that, because it's a waste of your time. And then there will be a disconnect between what you say you can do versus what you can really do. And people will sniff that out in interviews. When it comes to explaining the steps of your project, or quote, the storytelling, this is all you need to know. Don't just say what you did. You have to think of those 5 W's and the how of journalism, right? So here's a great example. 1 or 2 weeks ago, someone in Career Strategy Lab presented a portfolio. We do these things called Portfolio Demo Day, where you get 10 minutes to present and we give you 10 minutes of feedback. And we had a special guest from Chase sitting in, which was super awesome. But this person on one of their slides said something along the lines of, next, I interviewed 23 stakeholders and users. And that's all it said. And actually, it had bulleted list of some of the questions they asked in the interviews and some of the tasks they asked the people to do. Now that's good. That's I don't know, a B- maybe. It's telling us what they did, but this person from Chase made a really good point and echoed what I was going to say. And they said, I wish that you had also gone into the details of how that research happened and came to be. So in that case, the person could have explained, why did we decide to do interviews and usability testing to begin with? What were the criteria of these people? Like, who were they? Why did we select them? Maybe even how did we select them, or where did we find them? And then a little bit about what did we learn? So that's the difference between saying, I did research and interviewed 23 people versus what I just went through. I think that's probably enough, but that, I hope, helps people see what people mean, or maybe what they don't even know, goes into telling a good story, showing your process, going back to all the vague advice you see on social media.
Yeah, and I want to just add to that. It's what I call the checklist portfolio. Just adding the stages, like ticking activities of the checklist. And now I have the wireframes, and this is the prototype, and just the persona. And even when it doesn't make sense. And I think that what's very important in a portfolio and in your design role in general is to be able to articulate the rationale behind everything you do and your design decisions. And if you're not able to show that in your portfolio, showing why you did certain things, showing that there's purpose, there's intent behind everything that you've done in that case study, then it's kind of, it feels superficial. It feels like I'm just doing things as I read about them on the internet, and I don't clearly understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I think that the key here is to be intentional about everything you do in any design challenge you work on, and be able to show that intention. So I wanted to find out this, and okay, this is how I did it. You can talk about why, how you did the things. So why did you do it? How did you do it? And then to what outcome? What were the findings? But you always have to show why you wanted to do something. So why did we create a persona? Because we wanted to communicate to other stakeholders, stuff like that. But if you just say, I made a persona, then it feels like you don't really understand why you made that persona. And that's the key to being a good designer.
And from the perspective of those people looking at the portfolio, it could almost feel like you're wasting their time, And the other thing I would say is, a lot of portfolios read like answers to questions on a UX exam, like, what is a persona? And in your portfolio, don't say things like, next we created personas based on the research to empathize with the users. Like, maybe, like, I don't, no one needs to know that, because everyone already knows that. It's better to explain, like, the research you did to arrive at those personas, or something unique about those personas, like how they tie into certain user flows that the product focused on. So if you're having other people review your portfolio, that could be something to keep in mind. Like, does it sound like I'm defining UX terminology and processes, or am I providing evidence that I have done these things and put into practice all these terminology and process, etc. That was phrased incorrectly, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I think we totally got the point.
And
another very juicy question that I always get asked on UX Goodies and everywhere, a very stressful dilemma for all designers. You briefly touched upon it, but now let's dive deeper into it. The well-known question, where should I host my portfolio? I know you have a good experience with what works and what doesn't, so I'm gonna let you tell us what are some platforms or ways to showcase your portfolio that work best.
Yeah, I feel like I'm in a courtroom or in a debate or something like that, because I get this question all the time. And I advocate that you make a PDF first, and I'm going to explain why. And it goes back to you treating this whole thing like a product and the user of your portfolio. Now I know someone in the chat is going to say, but a hiring manager told me it has to be a website, or my bootcamp instructor is making me make a website. So sure, we could argue this both ways, but I'm basing what I'm telling you off of helping people with their portfolios since 2017 and like having thousands of people go through the different programs I run. So with that said, let's look at or think about the whole experience of getting hired. And I want you to think about this stage of interviews where you're going to have to eventually present a project. So whether that's in person someday or on Zoom, you're going to have to present, you will likely need to present a project. I personally think it is a weird experience if you're doing a presentation to pull up a website and scroll through that. Also, if your website happens to be down that day, you're really in a bind. So that's kind of how I started thinking about this. Like, if we know ultimately we're going to need a presentation, of which I think should be a PDF, then why would we create both a website and a PDF as our portfolio, right? Because in your case, as the person looking to get hired, you want to get hired quickly so you can have a higher salary or start earning a salary if you're not working right now, right? So if you try and do both a website and a PDF, that is going to take you much longer. The other reason a PDF is great is because based on conversations and feedback from so many people that I've worked with for the last 5 years, the resounding theme is using a website builder, a Squarespace, a Wix, a whatever. Seems easy in theory because their TV commercials are so good and you see, you know, those examples of portfolios that are amazing. But when you actually get in there, it's a lot harder to use and wrangle those templates and those tools than you think. Of course, that depends on your level of comfort with those tools, right? But all that to say, resounding feedback from people I've worked with that have said, once I switched from making a website to a PDF, I was able to do it so much faster. And then I got hired faster. So that's kind of my case. We have an article which we just linked to in the chat. I do the pros and cons of each format. I will say regarding Dribbble and Behance and things like that, I personally don't think they are a great tool to be getting to that process, right? They were kind of originally created to be shots of interfaces, of visual stuff. And I just don't think it's a good medium to be trying to do that storytelling. So I'm going to leave it at that. I know there's counter arguments, and I know people are going to have things to say in the chat, but that's just my experience and based on what I see has worked for so many people who have been hired after working with me.
I just want to add to that. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, and then I'll say my thing.
No, please.
Well, the other thing I'd say is there a case for having a website? Maybe, because yes, if someone Googles you and a website comes up, that is good. That's going to add to the first impression they have of you. But I would say that website does not need to be a carbon copy of the content of your portfolio. So I always recommend when you're creating, if you create a website to complement your portfolio presentation, think of it like a little marketing website, which is just giving like an appetizer or a movie trailer of what you can do. And then the call to action should be, and this is kind of a marketing thing too, hey, like if you want to see my portfolio, contact me. Well, guess what? Then you have their email, you know who they are, you can go back and forth and have a conversation with them. Whereas if you just have a PDF of your portfolio on your website, like any people can download it and you don't know who they are. So that's my final thoughts on that.
It's a smart tip, actually. Hook the recruiter and hiring manager to get
your marketing 101.
I just wanted to add one last point on the where to host your portfolio. For the past year, I think I became a huge fan of hosting your portfolio on Notion, because I think that Notion is like the easiest place to assemble your portfolio quickly, and it's super shareable and it's very quick to edit, and it kind of emulates the website experience. And it's just, I'm a huge fan of Notion portfolios. I think they do the job great, and you don't have to over engineer it as you would with a website. So that's also an option. And also, I just want to tell everyone that I've always had my portfolio in PDF only, and that's how I landed all my jobs. And it was never an issue with recruiters in my own personal experience. So with this, we wrap up the part about portfolios. Of course, I would love to talk about it for many hours, but our time is limited. And I also want to cover a bit of insights, some insights into the job hunt and how to optimize your job hunt. So you're a junior designer or mid designer. I think for senior designers, it's a bit easier because they get approached and they get recruited and recruiters come to them. So it's like, it's a bit, it's easier. It's a different perspective, but let's focus a little on the junior or mid designer that still has to fight for their job. What's the best way to go about the job hunt when you're in this stage of your career?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think one theme I keep seeing come up is a lot of people who are, so I think of people in their UX career in 3 phases. Either you're a career launcher, meaning you are just starting out, getting your first, quote, professional job, and it happens to be user experience. You're a switcher who is coming into UX from another field, like teaching or architecture or something, or you're a climber, which is that last person you said. So one theme I see, especially from these launchers and switchers, but sometimes the climbers too, is I want to work at a FANG company or like a big, well-known company, right? And I think that very much limits you in your opportunities of companies to work at, because I see so many companies who are hiring who may not be a household name and are desperate to hire people. And some of these companies are huge. I did a virtual conference in November, and I had the director of user experience at a company called Shopify, not to be confused with Spotify. Shopify is like powers a lot of online stores and stuff, but they're massive. I mean, they went public a couple of years ago. I think they were hiring like 100 people when I last spoke with them in November, 100 UX people. Now, many of you have probably never heard of Shopify. So that's a great example of don't be obsessed with FANG companies, because there's so many other companies out there. In terms of finding these roles, well, actually, I think we're going to cover that next. But in terms of just overall strategy of your job search, another thing is don't play the numbers game. And I know this is happening because people tell me, I applied to 200 roles and got 2 interviews, or someone said applied to 400 roles over the last 3 years, and I believe they got 4 interviews. And I know some people recommend you play the numbers game, and I have heard that some boot camps even encourage you to do that. I think that's a waste of your time, because if you're playing the numbers game, it's like you're throwing spaghetti at the wall. And going back to what we discussed earlier, you're not being intentional, A, about the companies you're applying to, or B, with the materials you're sending them. If you're applying to like 30 jobs a week, then you can't do really strategic things that I recommend, such as tailor your portfolio, resume, cover letter to that job. Now, I know someone in the chat is going to say, isn't that going to take me a lot of time? And I don't mean redo, your resume from the ground up every single time. Tailoring your materials could be as simple as reordering bullet points on your resume or removing or adding bullet points based on what you're seeing in that job description. The third thing that you can do to be more strategic and intentional in your job search, I think, is to do this thing that we have this phrase in Career Strategy Lab. We apply to jobs and we prioritize people over platforms. And what I mean by that is a lot of people in their job search think that means going to LinkedIn, Indeed, Glassdoor, whatever UX job board of the day, and just like cruising them and hitting apply to just go for the numbers game, right? And by people over platforms, that means kind of always having your radar up of or for people who may work at companies you're interested in and connecting with them. Now, connecting doesn't have to mean literally add them as a connection on LinkedIn. What I mean is follow them on Twitter, follow them on Medium, you can follow people on LinkedIn. You don't have to connect with them. And that's going to allow you to have visibility in case they post, hey, my team is hiring a UX intern or, a senior UX writer or something like that, which people do this. And I see these posts all the time on Twitter and LinkedIn. The benefit to doing this is then you can attach a person to the role. And if you are strategic with a cold email or message you might send them, then all of a sudden you might be able to start a conversation with them and increase your chances that you just don't end up kind of in the black hole of the pool of candidates. So hopefully those are 3 things that like are super actionable that maybe people weren't thinking about just yet.
Super valuable. And I stand by everything you listed here. And I also shared another article on this topic, the UX job search. And okay, so these are like some tips that you can apply when looking for a job. And I definitely, I also stumble upon this obsession with working with Google, Amazon, Facebook. Everybody wants, like, some people feel like they failed as designers if they didn't have the big company on their resume. But I feel like you can do more. This is another conversation. I'm not gonna go in that way yet. So what are some of the most common mistakes you see people making when they look for a job? What are like the main things that kind of dismiss them from landing that job?
Yeah, so we covered a few already. I think one of them is playing the numbers game, not tailoring your materials to the role, because I've talked to a lot of hiring managers, and I mentioned this conference I did. And one of the things that came up in conversation with the hiring managers I talked to was the concept of, as a hiring manager, don't make me think. So, dear applicant, don't make me think. And what does that mean? Because think about it from their perspective. They might have your LinkedIn profile, they have your resume, they have your portfolio, maybe they have a little cover letter or something like that. If possible, that cover letter, or if you're lucky enough to be able to, email them because you saw, or send them a message because you saw them post on Twitter or LinkedIn or wherever, make that first message you send them the message that really summarizes in, imagine, 1 or 2 tweets, like, why are you the person for that job? So if you can catch their attention in that little summary, that saves them from just, glossing over your resume and maybe missing those 1 or 2 things in your history that are really setting you up for success in that role. But because they didn't read every word, they won't know it. So if you're cold reaching out to people, or have an opportunity to do a cover letter, make sure you're really selling yourself and connecting the dots between what are they looking for and how does your previous experience relate to that. So that's, I forget what number that was. Another mistake that people make, this is a good one, not thinking about what you actually want in a job or a company before you even apply, right? Because that's how people end up playing the numbers game. But when you spend the time to outline the criteria of what you're looking for in a company in terms of culture, can you work remote? Who knows what else? Team size, opportunity to, grow. Like, is it a startup where you're the UX team of one, or is it a larger company where you could maybe not graduate, get promoted or move to other roles? So if you have this criteria identified, it serves as a really smart filter, which will help you narrow your job search and apply to more of the right roles, so you're not wasting your time. And this is one of the things that a lot of people in Career Strategy Lab say was really helpful, because oftentimes people say, like, I got hired, I just read one yesterday, and I think they said I got hired after applying to 7 jobs. Like, 7 is not that many. So they were able to do it because they were applying to the right jobs, and they also tailored their materials, et cetera, et cetera.
I'm also a huge fan of tailoring your application. So I really believe that even with Mento Design Academy, we insist when we teach our students how to go about the job hunt to personalize each application and each message that they send. So because we've all, like the mentors and the designers behind Mento Design Academy, we've been in the hiring role, and we know how frustrating it is when you get that like mass message from people, a person looking for a job. Hi, I'm interested in the role, and that's it. There's no context. There's no
no, like on LinkedIn, probably at least once a week, I see someone whose team is hiring. They post on LinkedIn and say, I'm hiring. And then what do people put in the comments? Hi, I'm interested in the role. Well, it goes back to don't make me think. Like, they're most likely not going to take the time to message you and say, oh, hi, I saw you're interested in the role. Like, no, send them a connection request, add a note to that connection request, which you can only do on desktop, and sell yourself, like connect the dots, start a conversation. And if you're not sure what to say, maybe you have a question about the role. A question is a great way to kind of get into the inbox and start learning more about that role. That's all I have to say about that.
No, I also noticed. So I just posted a job for a UX intern, which we all know is a rarity these days. I mean, actually these days less than ever, because I saw like recently in the past couple of weeks, like my LinkedIn at least exploded with internship roles this summer. That's great. I applaud that. I think the industry needs more internships. But anyhow, so I posted an internship in my company, and I got the same kind of reactions, like, I'm interested, and okay, but please, can you just send me an email or something more meaningful? If there are any details that I can clarify for you or anything of that sort. So you can't be so passive about your job hunt and expect things to happen. You have to go get like put some effort in, definitely, like with anything in life.
Exactly.
So we're here with my last question for today, and we also have a bunch of interesting questions in the chat. I'm gonna pick 3 of them after I ask my last question. So my last question kind of is circles back a little to the point we briefly touched on how it feels for the company to recruit. And so just for our audience to understand what it looks like from the company's perspective, what are some frustrating things that companies have to deal with? Like you've mentioned people who apply that are not necessarily right for that role or fit, but it's like a bit contradictory with this encouragement that you also see on social media. Post, apply for a job even if you're not the perfect fit, because you might get it and whatever. So what's it like from the company perspective? Like, they get thousands of applications. How do they navigate them? What are they looking at? Like, do they look for attitude? Do they look for curiosity? What do you know? Because I know that you've also been doing some work on that side as well.
Yeah, so I think, and this applies to whether you're a career launcher, switcher, or climber in UX, I think the one thing that can really help you stand out is your written communication skills as demonstrated in your portfolio and resume and LinkedIn, and any other email exchange message you have with them. time and time again, I hear from hiring managers that they're just like so disappointed in the quality of everyone's career materials in terms of, maybe the screen looks great of the app you designed, but if your portfolio is just the screen on a page that says like visual design, that's not communicating much that you are able to articulate what you did, why you did it, et cetera. So that is a huge one. I think another thing is, these answers are just kind of summarizing what we already talked about, but frustration around seeing portfolio checklist style portfolios that kind of are more feeling like they're educating people about what UX is rather than providing evidence that you know what you did, why you did it, how you did it, etc. Let's see. I think another thing for them is they are seeing candidates that are not leveraging their previous experience. So if you're switching into user experience from another industry, we've had an architect and an occupational designer or occupational therapist, just get hired into UX roles with I think they both had over 30% salary increases. But part of what they did to stand out was in their resume and on their LinkedIn, and especially in cover letters, was connecting the dots between architecture, like what they did as an architect and how that translates to UX, what they did as an occupational therapist and how that translates to, in that person's case, user research, because they got hired as a user researcher. So I think that's a big thing, because if you don't do that, you're really selling yourself short. And it goes back to that idea of don't make me think. You don't want to force the people looking at your materials to hunt through your past experience and think to themselves, okay, they were an occupational therapist, so that means X, Y, and Z. And yeah, I can see how that connects to research. Just tell that to them. I think that's all. I mean, there's so many, but I think those are good ones to just serve as a reminder and help everyone, understand their perspective too. I think oftentimes, there's almost this group therapy thing happening in the UX community where everyone just disses on quality of job descriptions and companies don't know what they're doing, all this negativity. And I'm like, yeah, okay, we can't fix all of hiring in a week, but let's see what can you do as a candidate. And that's what I'm more interested in. Don't spend your time joining stupid Twitter threads complaining. Think to yourself, what can I do to be part of the solution for hiring managers?
This is a very interesting angle that I hope will encourage more and more throughout the industry, because definitely I feel like companies are seen as this collective evil that's just super demonized, and they're trashed when they have a poor job description. But maybe we should help them articulate a good job description instead of trashing them for not understanding what UX is. So I feel like this is a topic for another event, definitely. How can we help companies?
Let me just read. So I said I've been doing research with hiring managers, and I'm not going to say who this is, obviously, but this is just one answer to the question of what's your number one struggle when it comes to hiring. Okay, they said, we cannot differentiate between a legitimate designer with real world experience and a spinster who is better suited for political endorsement than actually empathizing with a real client with real world product, service, design issues, etc. That's just one answer, and they're all very heated like that. So you can sense the frustration on their end. I'm not going to read you the rest of the answers, but if you just put a little bit of effort into this, you'll stand out. Because I say this all the time, but the bar to stand out is actually really low, even though you feel like it's high. Just do some of these things and you'll notice a difference.
I'm going to take 2 audience questions. I'm not sure we have time for more. Hopefully we could go through 3 of them, but let's start. Frankie. Hi, Frankie. Nice to see you here. She's also been a guest on one of our past events. She's asking how to handle interviewing when all work is under NDAs.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I always like to say, let's think to ourselves, does the NDA mean you absolutely positively cannot show anything, or is there some gray in there? So is there the possibility that you can't, and let's imagine this is like a design project where there were some screens and user flows produced, just for simplicity. So is there a way that you could show, like, redact some things on those screens to then maybe, hide the company? Is that a possibility? Could you swap in fake information so that it's not giving away anything? Are there if this was like, an app or some dashboard thing with multiple screens, maybe you can't show everything. Can you show like a couple of pieces of it? So that's one thing to think about. Are there parts of it you could show? I do think that it is possible to include a project in your portfolio without actually showing the screens. And you do this if you don't like rely on screens as a crutch in your portfolio and put more emphasis on the process. So maybe you are leaning into more of the research you did or more of the usability testing you did. And maybe you have super low fidelity, almost like just kind of block style wireframes that show like, this is where this section was, and this section was, and this section was, without showing the real screens. You might have to make a few kind of like fake wireframes, not fake, but like lower fidelity wireframes for that. But I think try and lean into that process a little more. Let's see, I'm not a lawyer, so, if you're really concerned, like ask someone else. But I think oftentimes we take like these NDAs as you must never show any of this. And I think if you went back and asked, there might be flexibility there, to be honest.
Thanks for your answer. I also get that question a lot. And frankly, I freeze when I get this question most of the times, because I don't know what are some ways to like work around this limitation. And but your tips kind of clarified it for me as well. So 2 more questions. I think 1 more question. Yeah. So Diana is asking, is it impossible to get a job when you are 60? Or 50?
Yeah.
Linda adds to that.
That's a great question. And it's funny, I was asked this earlier this week and I pre-scheduled a tweet about this to go out tomorrow. But the answer is, I think it depends based on what your previous experience is, because I'm guessing you are switching to user experience from some previous career, or maybe you've already been working in user experience and you're, getting back into it or trying to get promoted or something like that. And I think it's very dependent on what that previous experience is and how well you, or how good a job you do connecting the dots between that previous experience and highlighting what you bring to that team with all that previous experience. So if you previously worked in healthcare or finance and you are looking to get hired in UX, and you think to yourself, I want to work at a FANG company. Well, that's possible, but why not go to the companies or industries where you have experience? And this applies to everyone, but I think for someone that is 50 or 60, you have to be really strategic about companies where you could bring your previous experience, domain industry experience, along with UX skills, because that's going to make you stand out. If you apply somewhere in a UX role and you have 20 years working in healthcare or something, and you're applying to a healthcare company, I mean, that's gold, because you don't all of a sudden have to learn all about the nuance of healthcare compliance and HIPAA and all this stuff that goes into health products. So that's kind of the number one thing I would think about. And I would also stay tuned for the replies on my tweet. I kind of posed this more just as a general question and conversation starter, but it should be out around 11 o'clock, 1 o'clock Eastern tomorrow on my Twitter.
I was just looking for your Twitter link, so I share it
Oh, yeah,
here.
it's just, yeah, did you find it? It's just Sarah Doody.
Yeah, let me just,
put it.
I hope I'm not.
I got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
It's scheduled for tomorrow, though. It's not out yet. So
okay, so I think we're gonna wrap up the questions here because we want to time box to this event to 1 hour. We have 2 minutes left out of this event, and I want to use them to thank everyone who joined. This is the biggest turnover. How do you call it? Turnout. This is the biggest turnout we had with the Mento Design Academy event. So it was very, very successful. I want to thank you, Sarah, for accepting this invitation. We are thrilled to have so much wisdom shared with our friends here. And to everyone who wants to keep up with the Mento events, please join our meetup group. Make sure you also follow Sarah for all the valuable nuggets of wisdom that she's always sharing on Twitter. And Sarah, if there's any other place you want people to reach you, your website or anything, please share it in the chat now. And as we have this tradition with all Mento events, I want to invite everyone to share their LinkedIn link in the chat so we can all connect with one another. So this isn't just an event where we show up and never see each other again, but maybe some networking and who knows, some job opportunities or career opportunities come out of this conversation as well. So everyone, after we say our final thoughts, I will leave this Zoom meeting open for 5 more minutes so that everyone has the time to go through the links and connect. And so I will just mute myself, stop the video, and then the chat will remain open for socializing. And with this being said, Sarah, thank you so much. If you have any final thoughts that you want to share with the audience.
Thanks for having me. This was great. I love talking about this stuff. I know it's somewhat controversial, but I hope it was really actionable for people and kind of clarified some of the just surface level info that's out there these days. And feel free to connect with me, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. Yeah, I dropped the links in there.
Thank you so much once again, Sarah. I'm going to say bye to everyone, but I will leave the Zoom meeting open so we can all socialize in the chat for a couple more minutes. So I'm saying bye, muting, stopping the video. The meeting remains on. Bye, Sarah. Thank you so much for
Bye, everyone.
joining us.
See you.